Hello, everyone. The Coordinating Center for the National Drug Early Warning System, sponsored by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, welcomes you to our April 2018 NDUS Presents webinar. The NDUS PI is Dr. Eric Wish, and our NIDA project scientist is Moira O'Brien. I believe that both of them are in the audience with us today. My name is Erin Artigiani, NDUS COI. Barbara Kerr, Marwa Al-Nasir, and I will be the facilitators for this webinar. We are all part of the NDUS Coordinating Center team. For those of you who are interested, you can find detailed information about NDUS, recordings of prior webinars, and invitations to future webinars on our website at www.ndus.org. You will also find instructions for how to join our NDUS network and participate in ongoing discussions with approximately 1,000 experts and concerned citizens from across the United States and many other countries. We're currently engaged in a variety of conversations on topics like epidemiology, toxicology, and drug policy. So I hope to see you there. We developed the NDUS Presents webinars to work with leading substance abuse experts to explore emerging drugs and timely drug-related topics. Today, we are very fortunate to be joined by two experts from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime Laboratory and Scientific Section. Martin Raithelhuber, the illicit synthetic drugs expert, and Conor Crean, the Scientific Affairs Officer, will co-present today on early warning at the global level and highlight findings from the UNODC Early Warning Advisory on NPS. They will also be showing you some information on their website, which I'm sure you will find valuable. We expect this webinar to last approximately 90 minutes, and we encourage you to submit questions during and after the presentations. However, please don't use the raise hand feature. Please instead submit your questions in writing through the Q&A box. We will hold a brief Q&A session after both presenters have spoken. Our presenters, Barbara, Marwa, and I, will do our best to get to all of your questions. And if we don't, we will try to address any remaining questions after the webinar. A recording of this webinar and a copy of both presenter slides will be made available on our website, www.ndus.org. Thank you, and we hope you enjoyed this NDUS webinar. So we'll turn things over to Martin now.
Thank you very much, Erin, and I would like to thank you and your whole team for the opportunity to present today at this webinar on the UNODC Early Warning Advisory on New Psychoactive Substances. In this webinar, I will first talk a little bit about the emergence of new psychoactive substances at the global level, then move on to the role of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, short UNODC, particularly for the so-called prioritization of new psychoactive substances, and then finally talk about the response to the NPS phenomenon from the perspective of UNODC and the role of the Early Warning Advisory on NPS as part of this response. First of all, there's probably no presentation from a UN person which would not refer to the international framework we're all working in, the international drug conventions. It's a quite comprehensive framework for our work and for international collaboration. It covers aspects of access to medicines, a manufacture of medicines, but also the illicit aspects, illicit production of psychoactive substances, the trafficking of psychoactive substances, etc. One important takeaway here is that those drug conventions, they do not talk about NPS, about new psychoactive substances. So actually, when we talk about new psychoactive substances, we talk about those substances which are not covered by the international drug conventions, but which still may pose public health threat, which still may pose harm to users. In this context, new does not necessarily mean it's a new invention. It just means that substance is new on the market. Working on this phenomenon, new psychoactive substances. And this graph illustrates what happened from the global perspective since 2009. And what started as a relatively confined phenomenon, about 100 or so new substances having emerged in regions like Europe or North America, for that matter, turned into a global issue. The number of new substances appearing on the market, it doubled, tripled, etc., and spread to other parts of the world. And since about 2012, this phenomenon became a part of the international discussion under the heading of new psychoactive substances. So today we have about 800 new psychoactive substances we know of. Not all of them are on the market at the same time, but many are. So every year there are about 500 of these 800 which are being reported from different parts of the world. An important feature of this phenomenon was diversity. Diversity in terms of number of different substances, but also diversity in number of different chemical groups they belong to and effects they have. And we're going to look into that into a little bit more detail just in a second. An important feature of this emergence was the geographic spread. So what started as a European issue, maybe as a North American issue, soon caught up in many parts of the world. So that today we can really say that we are talking about a global issue. There's hardly any country that looks into the issue which would not find any psychoactive substances. Indeed, many countries have found a dozen or more than that, and some countries have identified hundreds of different substances over the past years. In total, about 110 countries and territories worldwide have identified one or more new psychoactive substances. Now, the question, of course, comes up, like, why is this happening? Now, this is not the point in time to really go into the reasons, but I like to give you a feeling for what is happening and how is it happening with this graph, which illustrates that basically all the NPS we know of, they map to an already known traditional psychoactive effect group. There are NPS which work like diazepam, like the old Valium. There are NPS which work like dissociatives. There are hallucinogen NPS, and there are many, many with stimulant effect, and even more with cannabinoid effects. And of course, and that's maybe more relevant for you at the moment, particularly for the North American audience, there are more and more NPS with opioid effect. So maybe the takeaway point here from this slide is that NPS, they did not really create a new category of psychoactive effects, but they map very closely to existing drugs on the market. Now, what's UNODC's role in this? We always need a mandate to start our work. Well, that mandate came in 2013 when member states asked us to collect information on this new phenomenon in one place and make it available to them. But they also recognize that it takes more than that, that you have to look into helping laboratories to identify those substances, which is in many cases not an easy thing to do. But definitely what is needed is a global reference point that brings together all this information, and that's what we call the early warning advisory on new psychoactive substances. Now, as it turned out, and remember that graph I showed on the emergence with more and more substances appearing on the market, that soon it became clear that we are no longer talking just about 100 or 200 substances. We're talking really hundreds. We're talking 500, 600, 800 at the moment, different substances we know of. So member states ask us to help them to prioritize the review of those substances. So basically what I wanted us to do is help them understand which ones are more important than others. Let's try to focus on a manageable number. And the criteria used for that were very clear. We need to focus on the most harmful substances. We need to focus on those which are most prevalent, most widespread. And we need to focus on those which are persistent, because many of the new psychoactive substances are known to appear and disappear. So they may be here this year, and next year you no longer see them. So the most prevalent, most persistent, and most harmful new psychoactive substances are those which the international community wanted to focus on. And the tool we offer for this job is the early warning advisory on NPS. So you already saw that we have a number of different clients and needs. There's the international community, the member states, the UN commissions, and so on. There's the World Health Organization, all of whom are concerned within their own mandates about the phenomenon of NPS. So we have that global reference point, but we also need to understand where we're going. So we need to do a trend analysis of the data. That's one important point. So just offering the data is maybe not good enough. So we need to go beyond just displaying data. And we also looked at how we can help laboratories with specific information for NPS identification, methodologies, for example, and a knowledge base of scientific names which could help them to talk to each other and say, yes, this is the substance I'm talking about. This is what I identified, and I know it by this name. And it's the same which you know by a different name. So we need a kind of a translation of all those different NPS names, and that's what a database also is. Now, where do we get our information from? We rely on many different partners, and a big thank you goes to all of them. And first and foremost, there is a network of over 250 forensic laboratories all across the world, which are part of a proficiency test program and capacity building program in over 80 countries. And they are a great help in identifying new psychoactive substances and reporting that information to us. Then, of course, we have our standard data collection exercises, annual reporting requirements countries have towards UNODC. But actually, there's not too much about NPS. They're not really made to capture that information. So we had to come up with new questionnaire surveys specifically targeting new psychoactive substances, and that we have done that already 3 times. We also get a lot of information from partners like the European Monitoring Center on Drugs and Drug Abuse, EMCDDA. We also get ad hoc communication and threat assessments, for example, from Canada, Japan, USA. We get information from the International Narcotics Control Board and the World Customs Organization. All in all, the system at the moment contains about 15,000 data points from over 110 different countries and territories worldwide. Now, this is how the system actually looks like. It's a web portal. You're looking at the start page. There is a public interface and there is a password protected interface. The public interface has general information on what are all those NPS, the different groups, etc. There are regular news clips and some resource material which are to be used or can be used by everyone. And there's a password protected interface which contains the actual database. Now, what can the database, what can the system do? What can users do with the data? Obviously, they can search for all the data, all the information in the system. laboratories among the users. They can also create a submission. They can say, yes, this is the substance, I found it last year, or I found it just a few days ago, and submit that information. Users can look up detailed chemical information on each individual substance we have in the system. And there's also a small part on legal approaches to NPS, covering about 50 different countries. So these are the main features of the system. We're looking now at the search interface. You find all the functionality you will know from other search interfaces. So there's nothing special about it. You can, of course, search by substance, country, year, etc. You can display the data as a map. You can display the data as a table, and of course also download the data. I already talked about the possibility for laboratories. We work with to make submissions. So this is the submission interface. It's relatively simple, so we want to keep it nice and easy, so it's not too much work to fill in that information. Of course, we are interested in like how this substance was identified, what were the analytical tools for identification and confirmation. You can, of course, drill down more into the database, take one specific substance and check what's the information we have on that substance. We looked at the let's say the prevalence side of the system already, like which countries, which years, but you can also look at the scientific information in the system, and that would give you information, for example, on all the different names the substance is known under, a common name, a scientific name, a UPAC name, and so on and so on, the molecular structure, etc. For many substances in the system, we also have further information which are useful for laboratories which want to identify the substance. There's some spectral information, there's references to sweet drug monographs. So for those who work in lab, they will know that's a very helpful resource. So all this is more geared towards the lab users and the chemists among our users. Finally, talking about the legal responses, that's a separate database with information on countries which have taken measures, control measures to address the emergence of NPS. To the extent we know of it, we include information on that. So it's a nice tool to compare what one country has done as opposed to another, get a quick understanding of which approach is prevalent in a country. There are paragraphs about analog control, about generic control, etc., about temporary bans, etc. So you get an idea very quickly about what is going on in different parts of the world in terms of legal measures. Of course, not everyone wants to really do the data crunching. Not everyone is a scientist or chemist, and I mentioned that earlier. A lot of our clients, they're policy makers. They work in ministries. Maybe they work in NGOs, etc. We need to provide information in a different format as well. Communicate what we are finding. And we have developed a range of products with varying frequency. Also, the most frequent would be the tweets. So you can follow us on Twitter. About 5 times a year, we have a newsletter, an electronic newsletter, which everyone can actually sign up for if you want, which has the latest on the system and other relevant information. And then there are some issues which really deserve a more in-depth research. We see something happening in the data, but we want to understand in more detail what is going on, why is it going on, For example, with regard to the opioid crisis, we had a so-called global smart update in March last year on the fentanyls and its analogs. So this is like a 10 to 12 page which explains one specific topic in a non-technical way, I would say, and we try to cover those issues which we feel are relevant, which we see emerging in the data we're collecting. So again, this is information which is available for everyone. And we issue those global smart updates 2 times a year. Now, finally, there's still some challenges, obviously, which we see for our work. The early warning at the global level is certainly different. Many of you may have experience with national early warning. We have different audiences. Not everything that is a local threat is automatically a global issue, so we need to look at that as well. We work hard to ensure a consistent flow of data from as many sources as there are. We try to widen partnerships as well. And then, of course, we need to acknowledge that not all NPS are still NPS in the strict sense of the word, and I would like to bring you back to my initial definition that NPS are those substances which are not under international control. Indeed, since 2015, a total of 39 different substances have been brought under international control. So by definition, they're no longer NPS in the strict sense of the word, but of course, in all the analysis we do on trends, we still include them. But there is another aspect of this international control decisions, and that is that laboratories worldwide are now required to identify those substances. Law enforcement is required to seize those substances. The countries in general are required to put in place regulation for those substances which came under international control in the last 3 years. That's a huge challenge for many countries. Not all countries have really caught up. We have programs to support those countries which need it. And with that, I'm touching upon the last point. You may have noticed that the early warning advisory and the data I presented mainly cover issues of geographic spread and persistence, like in how many years has this substance been reported by how many countries? And what about the aspect of harm? And the aspect of harm is actually something my colleague Conor Crean will talk about. He will present our very new approach to capture information on harm caused by new psychoactive substances. And before I hand over to Conor, I'd like to invite you to get in touch with us and sign up for our newsletters and publications. We're very happy with our distribution list. Conor, now over to you.
Thank you, Martin. I just wanted to complete the picture of the story of the work that we carry out related to new psychoactive substances, and talk a little bit about the next module that we're creating that is part of our early warning advisory. The idea is that if we look at the aspects of the system that Martin has already mentioned, we are covering a lot of the areas that people who have different needs and different specializations in this topic have requirements. And one of the things that the system as it existed doesn't actually capture is which are the most harmful NPS. And as this slide mentions, there was a UN General Assembly special session a number of years ago, 2016, and one of the outcome documents from that stressed how it was important not just to get the persistent and prevalent substances, but to find out which were the most harmful. So the next aspect of the early warning advisory that has been developed is to how do we capture this information? And this is just a timeline to show you that, I think as Martin mentioned already, there's a number of these resolutions that are passed by the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, which gives us mandates to work in a number of different areas related to NPS. And they've been quite strongly recognized, the challenges in the last number of years, and there's been a series of resolutions passed. And from these, we have been given this mandate to start collecting information on toxicology. So this is the guys who are first carrying out the analysis of substances in clinical settings or in post-mortem cases, unfortunately, in most cases, that if we can collect this information about the NPS that are around, we can have a better idea of which are the most important and most harmful substances. So what I have here is the web page that Martin showed, which is the early warning advisory as it exists at the moment. It has a separate module here, which links to the portal of the International Collaborative Exercises Program. This is where the laboratories enter the results for the proficiency test, and this is where we initially start to get information about the emergence of the substances. And this includes both laboratories who work in the analysis of seized drugs and a lot of toxicology laboratories. This next module, this is how the front page of the system that we are creating at the moment. I'll just log on at the moment to have to show you what it looks like. So the system has a dashboard which shows you currently some of the information that's in the system. So this was created over the course of a number of years with a lot of input from different experts at different expert group meetings. And we have information that's entered. Some of it's from the literature as to test the different parts of the system, and some of it's from pilot programs that we've launched. And one of the things that we created within this was, if we want people who are collecting information on toxicology to provide us this information, it's a little more complicated than just telling us about a substance that has emerged and a substance that has been identified using a different technique. We need to know a certain set of parameters related to a case that allows us to more comprehensively understand if this particular case is related to a very harmful substance. So I'm just going to show you now, this is the form that people can use to complete. I'll just go ahead and complete manually some of the events where people can enter it, so we can determine at what kind of level the case applies. There are various different case information. Some of the fields are obligatory and some of them are not. Some of them are very useful and some of them are just for statistical purposes. There's some privacy issues related to the submission of information, so we're always cautious about when an information is provided to us that it should not yet be made available to the greater client base we have, and eventually then to the public through the reports that we do. We have a report for collecting different information on the substances. So we have, because we have this database in the other system of over 800 substances, we can now populate this with all of those substances. So if I start to enter the name of any fentanyl, all of the fentanyls and their various names that are in our system pop up. So it's possible to select the substance that specifically people have identified. Matrices that the analysis is carried out on. If post-mortem analysis is carried out, the location. Some of these features are related to, for us to have good quality control over the information that's provided, so that we can be sure that it is of a reasonable quality. There are some techniques that we ask people to provide us with that they use to identify the substances, and whether or not the substance that's being compared with a pure reference standard or with a database or with an online database. And each of these contributes to the quality of the results and how it can eventually be used. And there's an option, if known, for the clients to tell us the relative contribution of the substance to a particular outcome of a toxic event or intoxication. And one of the things that we notice is that many of these substances are not present on their own. So in order to make it so that people don't have to enter this information again and again, we have created a feature so that you can copy down all of the fields you've already entered. And so if you change, want to change certain parameters, this makes it more easy. So people can add in a different substance or a different matrix or different methods of identification to give a more comprehensive picture of the case that they've been analyzing. There's some additional case information that people can also provide if it's to support the information that they're providing, and also to attach files like spectra or other analytical files that can help us to verify that the results of the quality of the submission that they have. So the idea is that when we have a lot of clients who are submitting this information, we're building up a database of quite a large volume of toxicology information on lots of different cases from lots of different toxicology laboratories around the world. And what we will have is this system which has all these case events that we have added. And what this allows people to do then is, to a certain degree, to give them the ability to mine through the data to pick out things that are very useful for their own extra work, as to find out, for example, what's going on in their country. If you look, for example, on the left-hand side, we can filter by all of the substances that have been entered, or we can filter by the countries, or by gender, or by many of the different parameters that are entered. So if I select one, then it filters out for all of the cases related to this opioid U47700. And here we can straight away see that the cases that we have been reported by a number of different countries. These other fields here show the other substances that have also been reported along with this substance in cases. And then there's also this option to look at the details of the particular analytical information related to the specific case. So the idea is that this information will allow us to analyze it on a global level, collected information from a range of toxicology laboratories. We can then do a more thorough assessment of the most harmful substances that we see out there. And then we can provide this information in kind of biannual threat assessments that will support the work of the World Health Organization and support the work nationally of people who, if they need to know about what substances they need to be aware of on their radar. We also need to provide information for clients so that there are certain graphics that will be of use to people, so that it gives them the incentive to go, if I need to find out something about a new substance, this will be the first place to look for it. So the system is finalized at the moment. We are having a final expert group meeting this week with a range of toxicology experts, and we will be launching it to our client laboratories that we already have, and we will be making it available to other toxicology laboratories who want to register, and information will be provided through the system later on at a certain point. So that's more or less what I wanted to add to Martin's presentation, just to give you an idea of the work that we're doing to close the circle on the information we have on NPS, so that we don't have to worry about 800 or 850 as it will be in 6 to 7 weeks, the way the numbers keep growing, but that we can really focus in on the ones that are most harmful, and then it'll help us to more greatly understand the problem. And with that, I'll show you a picture of the United Nations with its blue sky. And thank you for your attention.
All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your presentations, Martin and Conor. I think you shared some really useful information. I know certainly over here at NDU's Coordinating Center, we were making some notes while you were talking about some things that we want to follow up on. And we certainly appreciate all of the work that you guys have done in putting together your website and coming up with that interactive system for both providing information and looking at information. And certainly that would be something that we would be interested in some way trying to develop on our end as we move along as well. And so now would be when we would go into the Q&A part of our webinar. And so we've only had a couple of questions come in. I had one. I was just wondering, we've been tracking an outbreak here in the States related to severe bleeding that has occurred in people who recently used synthetic cannabinoids. And it's up to more than 100 cases now, up around 107 as of yesterday afternoon in about 4 different states. And I'm just wondering if you guys have seen or heard about any cases like that over in Europe.
I can say that I don't think we have at the moment seen this reported to us through our early warning advisory. But I know that the system that we're developing it's important for us to capture not just the substances, but also the other components that are present so that we can identify that, okay, is this a threat related to synthetic cannabinoids, or is it a threat related to some other poison or impurity that was particularly mentioned, so that we can understand what is the threat. But we haven't yet seen them, thankfully.
Right, yes, and that's what we're working to do over here as well. The CDC is working with the local health department to try to figure out what actually was involved in those outbreaks. And it looks like it might have been rat poison or something like that that got added to the drug. So I have a question here from one of our participants who wants to know if you have ever worked towards having more direct interaction with drug users themselves, if you've thought about having incentives for individuals to come in off the street and show you what they do or talk to you about what they do to come up with the different chemicals and different ways of using drugs.
Yeah, it's certainly part of UNODC's work. I mean, we are not as street workers, obviously, but we work with countries to improve their outreach to drug users, to reduce harm and risks associated with drug use. We have a whole and quite big branch on prevention, treatment, and rehabilitation. And the colleagues over there, they work in a number of countries to improve the approach and the quality and the width of services available to drug users. But we also think that one important aspect of that is to know what's out there. And that brings me back to that notion of early warning. We all know that people use drugs, but it matters what they use, in which combinations, so what's on the street. And I think early warning systems at different levels, you know, starting maybe from a local level to a national and to the international level, play a role here in improving the information available on what's out there in the streets, and that informs the responses too.
Okay, thank you very much. So now I have a question from somebody who has asked that there are some people in Africa talking about the use of pregabalin or gabapentin, and they were wondering what you might know about that. I can also point out that our webinar last month was actually on this topic. So we do have the slides from our 2 presenters and recording of that webinar available on the NDUS website, ndus.org. So that would be a resource where you could turn to get more information about that as well. But do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, it is. It's not a new thing. I'm sorry I missed that webinar. I couldn't make it. But we have heard about the non-medical use of both substances from the Middle East and North Africa mainly. I think it is a feature of the markets over there that drug use is more heavily in the direction of non-medical use of medicines, including prescription medicines. That's maybe an important difference to the markets in Europe and in North America. Nonetheless, there is a health concern, of course, when these substances are used in a non-medical framework. And from all we know, This is a growing phenomenon. I hear this more often and from more countries, but we don't really have systematic information on this phenomenon, and particularly not from Africa, where the information base is usually not very good, to say the least.
Okay. All right, well, thank you for that. Along the lines of Africa, we do actually also have a webinar where we had several speakers from Africa who were talking about their efforts in developing drug monitoring systems as well. So that would be something else you could find on our website. Our next question is, in the Tox portal, you mentioned that you could filter results by gender. Was this referring to gender identity or biological sex?
It's related to biological sex, because it's case information from hospital analysis and things. Some of these things can be important to get a greater understanding of case results. So it is biological sex, yeah.
Okay. Do you have a field anywhere or a place where you could collect gender identity?
It's not a form that's final, so
Okay.
It will continue to evolve as we see that this is the information that people need to know. So it's open for anything that needs to be added that's important.
Okay, so our next question is, can you describe the role that direct-to-consumer drug checking does or could play in identification of NPS in the EU?
Yes, I think not only in the EU, but maybe there are more such systems in the EU. I believe you already had a webinar from the European Monitoring Center on their system and how they get their information. But to keep it short, I find the information from the so-called drug checking services very valuable in the context of early warning. They're not always easy to use, but to the extent possible, we look at this information because it is very close to the market, very close to reality. So from the perspective of a researcher, I find this very, very useful. And so we're kind of like always looking out for more information sources, for more information coming from drug checking services. But of course, that's not the only role. I mean, the role they play goes much beyond that. Usually they're combined with counseling services, risk reduction, awareness raising, etc. So it's not my area of expertise, but just wanted to mention that we are aware of the many aspects drug checking services cover.
Okay, thank you very much. We have another participant who also asked a couple of questions about the database. First, she wanted to know what would be the best way to receive the most current or timely information by logging into the portal or following you on Twitter. And then she also wanted to know how she could go about getting, if possible, access to the portal, or if that is something that we could register for.
Yeah. So an easy way to get that information would be to sign up for our email newsletter, and everyone will automatically get the latest newsletters, information, etc. Logging into the portal, let's say live access to the database, it's for official use only at the moment, so it's not open to the general public, but we try to the extent possible to make available important information very close to the event.
Okay, our next couple of questions are from a toxicologist at a medical examiner's office who was asking if you work with Energy Control or any of the other laboratories providing similar services, and also if you are doing focused analysis on drugs associated with dark net cases versus street seizures.
Okay. We know the guys from Energy Control in Spain. I think they do an excellent work, we always look at the information they have. I mentioned already, I find this information extremely useful for the purposes of early warning. I think drug checking or drug testing services like energy control play a really important role. And indeed, in fact, they're doing early warning. We do not have a formal collaboration agreement, and I'm not sure whether that would be possible given the nature of those services. But we talk to each other, we know of each other, and I think we appreciate each other's work. Now, with regard to the darknet, we do not look into darknet drug quality, for example. I mean, I know there are studies. We have also colleagues working on cybercrime issues, but that's wider than just drugs. They look at all kinds of cybercrime issues, ranging from child pornography to money laundering. So drugs is just one aspect. Here, when it comes to NPS, so far we have found that the darknet does not yet play a major role. The open internet still seems to be the preferred way of getting substances through the internet, in addition to the street trafficking in some cases. So we observe this, but we are not really doing active research on it.
Okay, thank you for that. Your colleagues at EMC-DDA did do a report on the darknet, I think, though, last year, right? So I don't know if they may have some ongoing work in that area. Okay, our next question comes from the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, and that is from someone who asks, why so relatively sudden and to this extent? And this is in reference to the overwhelming number and diversity of NPS, and how expected or unexpected is this phenomenon?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah.
Deserves its own webinar, I'm afraid. But to share some thoughts on this, I would really look at the NPS phenomenon in terms of phases. And I think it started with substitution. So certain substances became scarce on the market, ecstasy, for example, MDMA in particular. And there was a search for substitution substances, and so that's how the first, in that case, stimulant NPS made it into the drug market. But then this whole phenomenon morphed into something else. Those substances were marketed on their own, under their own brand names. For example, the so-called bath salts came up for the stimulant market, the synthetic cannabinoids as the legal highs or spice, looking at their own marketing strategy, presenting those substances as a lower risk and legal alternative to other drugs. I think we are already beyond that phase now. What we're looking at now is that NPS target specific niche markets, prison population in some countries, homeless, vulnerable groups of the population who resort to NPS because of the price, because of the fear of detection of those substances if they are in a workplace monitoring or some kind of drug monitoring program, for example. So we have a diversification of the market in that sense. And when looking at the US now, I think we are again looking at something different, that it's not really substitution, it's combination. You know, fentanyl and fentanyl analogs are used as an adulterant in a way to heroin or oxycodone, but the adulterant is much more powerful than the parent drug, right? So this is something we have not seen before. So maybe a feature of this whole NPS market is that the market always looks for a new niche, a new possibility of supplying drugs and making money in the end. And what are the specific reasons at each point in time? That has changed over the past year, and they're no longer the same we started off with in 2000.
Okay, that's very interesting. Thank you. Our next question comes from the Greater Manchester Police in the UK. And this gentleman asks, have there been any further instances of crystalline cannabinoids being ingested by users as we had in June 2017? Or do you think this was a singular event?
Conor, I'm looking at you.
Not that we have seen reported to us by the laboratories, although sometimes we may capture the details of the chemistry of the substances involved and not necessarily always directly from the laboratories capture the greater stories of the cases, but it is something that I think we need to try and capture as well. It's difficult to try and collect it from many different sources as well, and to be sure of the quality of the evidence directly with the substances we're working with the laboratories. So I can tell you that we haven't seen it reported to us directly in that sense.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next question is again about your portal and your database, and this is from someone asking, with the growing phenomenon of non-medical use of prescribed drugs, is there a place in entering information in the database for where the substance originated from, if known? For example, if prescribed and prescribing physician is known, can that information be added to the database?
Some of the information can be provided in case commentary if it clarifies the quality of the data. It's not necessarily for this case, but some of the things we do know is we have seen that a lot of the substances are taken in combination. So in order to get a greater understanding of the degree to which each substance contributes to the outcome of the event, it's important to get that information. So anything from that people complete in their case reports that's submitted to the system gives us more information and gives them more information to make an educated conclusion. So some things are very useful to add.
Okay, thank you very much. We have another question that came in. It's also about the database. This one is from somebody who says toxicology laboratories are struggling not only to detect NPS, but also determine what they actually do. For example, W18 was ubiquitous across Canada and other countries in 2016 and 2017 until a paper was published demonstrating that it has no known pharmacological activity. Is there interest in incorporating more research findings like these into your database?
Yeah, that's the next bit that needs to be added. If once we find out which these substances are, we know that they're harmful, we may not know how they work, then the studies need to be carried out on what is the pharmacology of these substances. Because sometimes they can be sold as something to mimic a specific substance, but if they're new and they haven't been taken from the patents in the literature, for many cases it's not known. So the question's a good question. It's exactly what's needed is further research.
Okay. Thank you very much. Our next question is from the Drug Abuse Issues Coalition, and this gentleman is asking if you have seen any medical synthetic THC mixed with NPS.
No.
Okay, thank you. And then our last question is from someone who asks, has there been discussion of what analytic details would most help addiction treatment and not only overdose avoidance and reversal?
Well, yeah, it's that collection of the correct analytical information that gives us from all different types of analysis that's carried out by the tox person on one side, by the seized drugs people on the other side, that allows us to make a more educated and have a greater understanding of what's the importance of a particular case. And then it can feed into the different clients who have access to the products of the early warning advisory and will do to the products of the tox module to give them a greater understanding of the challenge it poses to the different specializations that they work in.
Okay, and then our last question is from our colleague up in Canada at their monitoring system who asks, how confident are you with assigning causality with multi-substance cases?
Well, one of the concepts behind the way that the toxicology module will work is that we will get the data reviewed by specialists. So causality is obviously a very complicated thing to measure certain cases. So it's only, I think, when we start to collect larger volumes of information and see the collected information that we can start to make more educated guesses, or not guesses, but more educated understanding of the contributions of various different substances.
Yeah, I think at the beginning we will look at associations rather than causality, although the system allows those who submit data to assign a degree of causality if they want. But as Conor mentioned, I think that is very complex, and we are fully aware that we have to be extremely cautious with that, also given the lack of knowledge Conor mentioned before about the actual effects of many of the new substances, and particularly if you have more than one of those in the system.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That gets us to the end of our Q&A, and I just want to thank you both again for your presentations and for all the information you also shared in responding to our questions from our participants. And right now, I'm just going to launch a brief poll, and I hope you guys who are still with us will just take a minute or two to answer a few questions for us and help us with our future planning. And in the meantime, I will remind everyone that we will put a copy of the recording of this webinar and the slides from our presenters on the website at ndews.org. Give us a week or so to get everything organized and posted, but you will see that there. And so you are welcome to go and check out that or any of our other webinars. And also, if you haven't joined us on our NDEWS network, I hope you will consider doing that as well, so you can continue to be a part of our conversations about this kind of topic and many others. And to let you know, we are planning a number of future webinars in the coming months, and we're looking at topics including vaping and the dark web, and also to follow up on what we were talking about today in terms of collecting and presenting data and monitoring what's going on. We're working with colleagues at the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention here in the US, who have been building a new hospital survey and are in the process of recruiting hospitals to participate in collecting and reviewing the data that they've gotten in, and they're going to give us an update on what they've been doing and learning as well. And so I hope that you all will keep an eye out for our future announcements and will join us at future webinars. And again, thank you everyone for joining us today. And I'll just give you a few more seconds. It looks like most people have finished the poll. And yeah, I'm not seeing anything going on. So I will end the poll, and I will say thank you again, everyone. And we really appreciate, Martin and Conor, you joining us today. And hopefully we'll be able to continue to work with you in the future. So thank you, everyone. And we hope to see you again next time.